Christopher Calabrese is joining us here in Washington. He is with the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. Good morning. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thanks.
Let's talk about this issue of cell phone tracking, and let's just take a step back and ask you, when you're on a cell phone, what kind of information can be gleaned from those who want to find out who you're calling and where you're phoning from?
Well, a lot of information. I mean, your cell phone is communicating with the cell tower about every 7 seconds, whether or not you're on a call or not, simply to say, I'm here if I need a call. So that is revealing the location of the cell tower that it's going to. Frequently that information is triangulated, so it's multiple cell towers, so it gives you a precise location. And then oftentimes, if you have a smartphone, your phone is actually gathering location in a lot of ways, what the nearest Wi-Fi spots are, for example. So it's pretty precise information about you, where you are, and of course it's keeping a detailed log of your movements all the time, or all the time you're holding a cell phone.
Is there anything wrong with this?
You know, we think that, well, there's nothing wrong with you sharing your information if that's what you choose to do to use a particular service. There's nothing wrong with the phone company doing it per se. Of course, it's part of their offering a service. What we need to do is have controls so that it's only accessed by law enforcement, for example, with a warrant when they believe that you've committed a crime, for example, or it's only accessed by companies with your permission when you want them to.
Let me share with you the Assistant Attorney General, Jason Weinstein, who spoke about this issue at a recent event. Here he is.
Probable cause is a standard that we follow historically in American law enforcement for our most intrusive techniques, search warrants in your home, wiretaps, now GPS information on your cell phone. But it's important to keep in mind that we don't start our investigations with probable cause. We build up to probable cause using less intrusive techniques. We have to use these less intrusive techniques as building blocks, if you will, to develop enough evidence to overcome a probable cause standard. Cell tower information is a very important one of those building blocks. It's used routinely in the early stages of criminal investigations and national security, terrorism investigations, when the government just doesn't have probable cause for a warrant, to try to develop enough evidence to get over that hurdle. And the failure to distinguish between different types of location information and to require probable cause for all types would cripple, and I don't use that term lightly, would cripple many law enforcement and national security investigations before they can really reach their goal, and would make it substantially harder to get this information and to solve crimes.
So, Christopher Calabrese, this really dealing with the authority and the jurisdiction of law enforcement officials. Many times they need that information. A life could be on the line. A criminal could be loose. Anything wrong with that?
Well, I think it's important to understand that these are constitutional protections. Anytime you put a barrier up that says that we're going to require certain processes, it makes things harder for law enforcement. We acknowledge that, but that's built into our Constitution. That's built into the Fourth Amendment to say law enforcement can't do whatever it wants. Recently, the Supreme Court said location information implicates the Fourth Amendment. It's part of our constitutional rights. Now, knowing that, we have to set up a process whereby it can be accessed in an appropriate way. For example, there's a bipartisan bill in front of Congress right now that would set up appropriate controls, including probable cause, but also including an emergency exception. So location information can be used, but can only be used when it's appropriate.
This issue of a generic warrant, though, that the Assistant Attorney General was talking about, does that cross the line, the constitutional line?
Well, I think the constitutional line really is a warrant based on probable cause. That's what we're saying. And, you know, what we're getting evidence of here is we're getting probable cause that your location is going to reveal evidence of a crime. So if I suspect that you robbed a 7-Eleven, of course I can get your cell phone location information to see if you were at that 7-Eleven. That's evidence of a crime. This isn't a very high standard. It's not a you can never use location information. It's just weaving it into the fabric of law enforcement investigations in the same way that we've always used probable cause warrants.
We'll get to your phone calls in just a moment. The number's on the bottom of the screen. Also send us an email, journal@cspan.org, or you can join our Twitter page at twitter.com/cspanwj. Let me share with you what Senator Al Franken, Democrat of Minnesota, said in a recent letter to the Justice Department, quote, "I am writing to ask you that the Department of Justice's own practice of requesting location information from wireless carriers. I am eager to learn about how frequently the Department requests location information and what legal standard the Department believes it must meet to obtain it. I would also like to know how the Department may have changed these practices since the Jones decision." Can you elaborate?
Sure. I mean, it's really striking. What Senator Franken is asking for is basic information. How often do you do this? What kind of investigations do you use it for? Are you getting reimbursed? I mean, really fundamental stuff. I mean, this is a common law enforcement practice. It's really amazing that we don't have this kind of information already. And we applauded Senator Franken when he wrote that letter for seeking that kind of basic information. And we're really interested to hear what the response is going to be.
Christopher Calabrese, who is a graduate of Harvard and earned his law degree from Georgetown University, is the Legislative Counsel for Privacy Issues at the American Civil Liberties Union. The website is aclu.org. Mark is on the phone from Flint, Michigan. Independent Line, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
I'm calling in regards to invasion of privacy. It's not just with cell phones, but another issue that needs to be taken up is what about the National Defense Authorization Act? I mean, mainstream media doesn't talk about that. I've heard little mention of it on C-SPAN. I'd like to know what you have to say about that.
Thank you.
Well, the NDAA, of course, is very troubling. It's something the ACLU has been talking about for quite a while. We don't think that the NDAA, to be clear, it would allow military detention of civilians indefinitely. And it's something that we feel is very troubling. We feel like it's a violation of the Constitution. We need to keep the military out of U.S. civilian life. People certainly shouldn't be detained by the military indefinitely. I mean, these are, again, fundamental constitutional freedoms, safeguards. You know, this larger tapestry of privacy, law enforcement powers, national security powers. We've seen a real expanse over the last 10 years, of course, in how these powers are used and the powers we've granted the government. That's why our constitutional freedoms are so important, because they're the benchmarks that say you can't go past this line no matter what the situation or no matter what the current circumstance.
Now, this question may be apples and oranges.
Sure.
Because it's not tracking information, but location information. This from a viewer saying, if location information is protected, how come anyone can buy anyone else's address and phone number and family relations and more online?
It's a very good question. You know, the first thing to understand is the Supreme Court case is very recent. So we really haven't seen the full implications of that case in lower court decisions. But, you know, information that you share, sort of like if I tell you my location, that's different, I think the court thinks, than if a device is essentially recording my information and sharing it without my permission. So it's a little bit of a different legal standard, but I think it's important that we really get control of the fact that personal information is flying around about each of us and we really have no control over, and that's part and parcel of this location tracking piece.
So to go back to your 7-Eleven analogy, Monty, at this point, if you're not doing anything wrong, there is nothing to worry about.
Well, you know, that's interesting. I mean, the reason the Supreme Court was so troubled by this is they said location tracking reveals your associations, where you are all the time, who you spend time with, your interests and hobbies, and not just at any particular time, but all the time and all of them. So whether you're going to a peace rally, or a therapist, or a bar, or church, or all of those things in any particular order, that should be protected. And you shouldn't worry that the government is monitoring you. They might take an interest in you, or your employer might take an interest in where you're going. You should be able to do these things because you're a free American. You should be able to do them without worrying that the government is scrutinizing you, certainly without a good reason.
This has sparked quite a debate. At this point, if location information is protected, how does Google get away with street views, satellite pictures, traveling cam cars driving up people's driveways?
You know, they are a little different, because the street view, of course, is something that they're taking simply by driving around. They're essentially taking photographs of things that are in plain view, whereas with a cell phone, you're paying for cell phone service. And, of course, you don't assume that you're going to be giving up your privacy when you pay for cell phone service. But more fundamentally than that, Google's not the government. And the government, you know, has its own set of rules. They're set by the Constitution, and that's really what we want to safeguard. I mean, we want to safeguard it all, but, you know, at this point, we're focused on the government.
Our topic, cell phone tracking and the issue of privacy and privacy rights. Our guest is Christopher Calabrese of the ACLU. Lou Ann is joining us, Republican Line from Oregon. Good morning. Welcome to the program.
Good morning. I would like to know why the general news media isn't even picking up on Obama has ordered 30,000 drones for America. I have called my senators and House of Representatives and said, what's going on? And they keep telling me, well, we'll pass it on. What are they passing on, something or nothing? We are losing our freedoms under this man faster than any other president in the United States we've had. I'm very concerned. And I'm very concerned since I'm so political. Am I being watched? I'm on the phone 3-4 times a week calling D.C. to my representatives, and I'm getting nothing other than we'll pass it on. And we pay buku bucks for these people to tell me they'll pass it on. What are they passing on? Are you following me? Are you tracking me? I believe you are. I even believe my phones are tapped. How many other people in America that are political wanting to stand up for their freedoms, and we're losing them, and are we being tracked on our phones at home and in privacy or driving around or somewhere else?
Luann, thanks for the call. Christopher Calabrese, your response.
You know, so many good points there. I mean, for one, she's really struck on something. You know, if you are political and you're worried about what's going on in this country, you know, you worry that someone's spying on you, and you worry that that's sort of suppressing your ability to exercise your fundamental freedoms. In regard to drones, Congress recently passed the FAA Reauthorization Act, the Federal Aviation Administration Reauthorization Act. In that provision, there was a bill that authorized the more widespread use of unmanned aircraft, or drones, over the next 5 years. So we are going to see an expansion of drones. It's very important that legislation didn't contain explicit privacy protections that said how those drones are going to be used. I think that's going to be an ongoing discussion we're going to be having over the next 5 years. What are the privacy protections for essentially cameras in the sky?
And this from Don: if you don't want to be tracked, then get a no-contract phone.
You know, it's not a bad idea. The problem is, of course, that even with a no-contract phone, your phone is that phone is still talking to cell towers. It has to in order to get you service. So, you know, and given the amount of information that's out there, once your phone number is connected to your identity, and that can happen in a wide variety of ways, that no-contract phone is still going to reveal your location.
Next call is Mike from Stafford, Virginia, Independent Line. Good morning.
Yes, hello. You know, the crux of this whole problem to me is that the deeper a nation gets in debt, the more laws it has to pass to give itself back a sense of control, control and authority that it sees slipping away. With the Patriot Act, the NDAA Act, National Defense Authorization Act, I mean, these are abominations. And I think we better realize that our privacy and our rights are becoming truly a thing of the past here. And I believe it's time, you know, as Jefferson said, you know, when injustice becomes the law, revolution becomes your duty. And as James Madison said, if tyranny and oppression come to America, it will come under the guise of a foreign enemy. So we all hopefully will take note of these things and act accordingly. So thank you.
Thanks for the call.
Yeah, I mean, our fundamental freedoms are the kind of things that we can't allow to be bartered away for any particular concern and any, you know, in fear of any particular enemy. We have to recognize that the Constitution has served us well for more than 200 years. It'll continue to serve us well, but we have to embrace those values.
Our next call is Connie joining us from Puerto Rico. Good morning, Connie.
Yeah, good morning. In terms of cell phone tracking and privacy rights, I really think that there needs to be a balance because in an internet age where so many things are electronic and records are electronic, I think, national security concerns should be primary. What I'm concerned about is that people in power using these things for partisan purposes, and that there should be some legitimate oversight, not just everything vested in the executive. And also we need to be concerned that you don't get into a Joe McCarthy age where people are branded inappropriately. So if people, try to, so people just need to have checks and balances and restore those in our government.
Thank you, Connie.
I think Connie's absolutely right, and it's interesting. There'll be a hearing this Thursday on a bipartisan bill to make location tracking require a probable cause warrant. That's a bipartisan bill. It'll be in the House Judiciary Committee. It's sponsored by very, very strong Republicans like James Sensenbrenner, who was the former chair of the House Judiciary Committee, Mr. John Conyers, who is also the former chair of the House Judiciary Committee on the Democratic side. So there really is, I believe, a bipartisan consensus that probable cause warrants are an appropriate check for location tracking. We may also need some reporting requirements as well, as Senator Franken called for. But I think that a middle ground solution really is possible and appropriate here for location tracking. Because you're right, I mean, we have these new records. We don't necessarily have rules for them. We need to create those rules.
As you well know, a decade ago, the debate that followed the 9/11 attacks was the Patriot Act. And the question is, where does the Constitution come down versus the issue of national security? And that seems to be somewhat along the lines of now what we're dealing with as the Justice Department looks to try to track cell phone usage as a way to either prevent a crime or track down a criminal.
It's interesting, the national security debate here, because here, really, much of what the discussion has been up to this point has been law enforcement. Not national security, law enforcement. And they are two different things, of course. And so, in this bill that I was just describing, there is actually a national security exception, which is really a separate issue because we don't know what's happening in the national security realm with location tracking. There's a different set of rules. There's an enormous amount of secrecy. And I think that raises really troubling concerns, the same ones that we had in the Patriot Act, where if we don't even know what's going on, we don't even know what techniques are authorized, how can we regulate them appropriately?
And again, I phrase this question in the it's related category.
Right,
we've been following, this is a separate issue, but we've been following, of course, what's been happening in Great Britain. We, in fact, have been covering the Levinson inquiry, in which Rupert Murdoch and Rebecca Brooks and others have been taking some direct questions. One of our Twitter followers is saying, is there an American investigation of News Corp's guilty of years of hacking cell phones? How do you think they got those #1 stories? Is there anything to parallel what we're seeing in Great Britain here in the U.S.?
Well, clearly, in the UK is where the investigation is happening. I mean, that's where most of the parties are. That's where most of the, at least up to this point, most of the hacking seems to have taken place. I know the FBI was certainly investigating whether, there was whether a U.S. company was essentially violating foreign law, which would be a violation of U.S. law as well. And I suspect that they're also looking into whether there were American victims of this kind of, wiretapping and hacking. And it's related, it's not directly related, but it does sort of demonstrate, you might not have anything to hide per se. You might not have done something wrong, but I mean, if you look at what happened in that investigation, I can't remember the name of the model, but her assistant was fired because of, because information leaked as part of the, the UK wiretapping scandal, and the model just assumed it was her assistant who'd leaked it because the assistant was the only one who knew. So she was fired. She lost her job. She didn't do anything wrong, but there was a privacy violation. It has real consequences. So even if you haven't done something wrong, there's still very much serious consequences and reason we have these privacy laws.
The issue of privacy and the Constitution and cell phone tracking, again, that's our topic with Christopher Calabrese, who is joining us here at the table with the ACLU. Our phone lines are open. Give us a call with your comments and questions. Dan is on the phone, Republican line from San Diego. Good morning, Daniel.
Hi, yes, good morning, gentlemen. First off, high five C-SPAN. I appreciate your service. And also high five ACLU. I appreciate your pushback on this. I've been greatly concerned about this trend since really post-Patriot Act. And though you just briefly touched on this, my question is, what percentage of usage of this trend is being engaged in local law enforcement? And if we are concerned about the usage of this trend in national security interests, how can we possibly get access to the amount of times that this is being done? Thank you.
It's a fantastic question. We were really worried about that same thing. So the ACLU did a nationwide FOIA request of about 400 different local law enforcement just to get a
Freedom of Information.
Sorry, Freedom of Information Act request to try to get basic information on how local law enforcement is using this technique. And of the 200 police agencies that responded, 190 of them use location tracking. So it is essentially a universal practice, and only a handful of them are doing it with probable cause. So we really don't know exactly how much location information is being tapped by local police, but we know it's a lot.
Randy has this point of view. The government has been listening to us for a very long time. Anything they want to use, they'll say national security to get around the law, which goes back to the Patriot Act issue earlier.
And we have to push back against that trend. We also need rules that start with police. I mean, right now we don't even have the basic rules for law enforcement, never mind the national security realm. We'll start with law enforcement, we'll get a probable cause warrant, and then we'll try to get more information about what's happening in the national security realm where we really don't know what's happening, and then we'll push for an appropriate standard there as well.
Peter, good morning to you, joining us from Lawton, Oklahoma. What's your question?
Good morning, gentlemen. I love your program. I see very similar parallels between 1930s Germany and today in the United States.
How so?
We are living in a fascist state right now, and our police state. And one quote that I ran across from a lady who survived Nazi Germany, she said, "Our freedoms were not taken in a flood of new laws. It was taken like the slow drip, drip, drip of a leaking faucet." And that's what's happening today. And I believe, and I truly believe this, the politicians are throwing all these other red herrings out there like abortion, gay rights and everything to focus the attention away from what's really happening. Fascism is the merger of corporations and the state. Mussolini did the same thing when he basically took civil rights away, and it just festered from northern Italy down to Rome, and eventually he took over the whole country. This is what's happening in this country. But you can also go back to 1933. This is not the first attempt to take our rights away. It was called the business plot, where the bankers, the corporations tried to actually overthrow the United States government, and they were working hand in hand with Nazi Germany.
Peter, I'll stop you there. Thanks for the call. Christopher Calabrese?
Well, I mean, things get bad in this country. We recognize that, and we saw about 100 years ago, there was an anarchist plot. There was actually a bomb detonated on the floor of the Senate. It's not the first time. This was a century ago. It's not the first time we faced these kind of problems, terrorist issues, violence in our country. We've maintained our core values in the face of that, and it stood us well, and stood, hundreds of years of freedom, economic prosperity, happiness. So I think we just need to continue to stick with what's got, which is what's created the success of this country, which is our constitutional values. And we need to resist any efforts, this slow drip drip of taking away our rights.
But let me go back to really the debate that so many people have been wrestling with, which is, if law enforcement officials are trying to track somebody down that is a known criminal, that could be a threat to society, could be a threat to individuals, why not, in this case, overstep any individual rights for the protection of the larger population?
I don't think that would be an overstepping. I mean, if you've got a known criminal, someone who's either been convicted of a crime or, there's a warrant out for their arrest, that's well...
Or even suspected?
Well, if you've got probable cause, which is just basically says that you have enough evidence that you could arrest them, essentially. So it's not, that's well within the system that we have now. And that's an appropriate use of location tracking. So I'm really glad you asked it, because it's not this idea that we can never use these new records and these new tools. But they have to be used in an appropriate way with a framework that guarantees that the innocent aren't surveilled along with the guilty.
And where does that line cross?
Well, the line, I believe, and we believe, is really probable cause. So if you've got someone who you believe is a criminal, you've got evidence that shows that they were in the area, or just a variety of different ways that you can determine that they're possibly involved in this crime, you can certainly use location information to make that case. And that's, again, that's within a standard that's existed for a long time, and that's probable cause. Law enforcement understands it. Prosecutors understand it. They can employ it here.
Robert has this question, Mr. Calabrese. Couldn't phone tracking be considered harassment?
I mean, that's another side of this, of course, is if a private party uses tracking, and it's not just cell phone tracking, it could also be a GPS device on a car, for example, to track the location of someone they're stalking, or it can be an abusive husband or boyfriend stalking their ex-wife or husband. So we could have a situation where private parties misuse this. There really isn't regulation of location tracking. We haven't talked about that, but that's certainly something that this law would regulate, and it's an appropriate regulation.
Robert is on the phone from Anderson, Kentucky. Good morning.
Good morning. I don't know why people worry about government tracking all that stuff. Any crook can go down to the Radio Shack and $8 or $10 buy something that could walk by. You walk by them and they can steal your information. They're the ones that sort of steal from you and take from you, and and everybody worries and worries about the government. There's zillions of these phones and stuff out there, and there's antennas for them everywhere, and you can't expect privacy with that stuff.
It's a very good point, and he's absolutely right. I mean, that's the other piece of this GPS Act, this bill that I mentioned is going to be before Congress, or it's going to have a hearing on this Thursday, is that it would also, just the way government keeps people from tapping your phones and makes that illegal. It's not just illegal for the government to do, it's illegal for me to tap your private conversations as well. Similarly, we would want to make location tracking illegal absent, things like your own consent. So a private party doesn't have to worry about being tracked in their day-to-day life.
Joseph, goes back to my earlier question, Steve. If you have probable cause, you can get a warrant and track. But one of the issues that we've been reading and researching this topic is that in some cases law enforcement officials don't have enough time to get that warrant and they just want to go ahead and begin tracking cell phone usage.
Well, again, similar to the Wiretap Act, similar to the way we do phone tapping conversations, if you have an emergency, and there's really two kinds of emergency. There's a law enforcement emergency where you think somebody's in danger, but you don't have time to get the warrant. You can go ahead and track them for 48 hours and then go back and get the warrant later. So you can track first, get the warrant later if you have the standard. And then if you have the other kind of emergency where someone's lost or they've been kidnapped, that's an emergency where someone's life and limb is in danger, and then you can track as well.
Glenn is on the phone from Brookville, Missouri. Good morning with Christopher Calabrese of the ACLU. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. I'm fully in favor of people being able to track somebody, because I know a man here that his wife was supposed to be working and she wasn't, and he tracked her down exactly to find out where she was at and that she was cheating on him. I think that's a wonderful way to be able to do something. And thank you.
Well, we disagree on that subject.
Robert is on the phone. A lot of viewers in California early on a Sunday morning this Mother's Day. Go ahead, Bob.
Hello. Hello?
Yes, you're on the air.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm Rob from Chula Vista. I'm in the industry with video tracking, and I know this topic is on cell phone tracking, but it also is about GPS. Serve to the ACLU, man. If this passes, what about the GPS monitors for pedophiles? Would that give them a way out? Because they're routinely cutting them off and reoffending. And I would also like to note on our California channel, they're talking about video camera tracking in taxi cabs because there's a high rate of mortality in taxi cabs. Would that also block that? Now, at what point in time do we give up privacy for freedom?
Well, those are two interesting examples. I think we could regulate both of them under the bill. I'd have to go back and actually look at the language, but I would assume that, tracking of, for example, a convicted offender of any sort, there's already a consent exception, and you would build in another law enforcement exception for that. Similarly, if you own the cab, you're obviously allowed to track yourself, in essence. And so I think that would be outside of the law as well.
Going back, though, assuming that the tracking is taking place, so this is from a Twitter from a viewer saying, will they track everything and then look for the anomalies in the data?
I think that's the real concern, right? I mean, if we start to say, well, you're guilty until proven innocent, so I'm going to keep an eye on you, just the people who we think are a danger, and I'm just going to track them all the time, and I'm just going to see what comes up, and then if something does come up, I'm going to investigate it. Well, I mean, not only is that really suppress your freedoms and your right to, go about your day-to-day life, but, what's going to be uncovered? How much abuse and how much fraud, or I shouldn't say fraud, but how much abuse is going to take place as we start to target people we don't like or we think are suspicious or for whatever political stripe or persuasion we think are troublemakers.
Well, let me take that one step further, because we read so often how difficult it is for those who are convicts getting back into society. If you suspect somebody who has been in jail, they've served their time, they're now trying to get back into the workforce and get on with their lives in society, what are the chances that that person, that individual, could face this kind of tracking?
Well, you have to worry about it. I mean,
assuming they've done nothing wrong.
Assuming they've done nothing wrong. I mean, we've certainly seen a number of barriers put in the place of people post-conviction who are really just trying to reintegrate into society. And you would worry that ubiquitous tracking would seem like an easy way to kind of keep an eye on and make sure that they're not causing any trouble or they haven't reoffended. Well, you know, in this country, you're innocent until proven guilty for a reason. You know, and all of us, I think, want to enjoy those kind of freedoms. So technologies like cell phone tracking that make it easy to do this really are too much of a temptation. They need to be regulated.
You can get more on this issue by logging on to ACLU.org, the American Civil Liberties Union. Tom is on the phone from Port Charlotte, Florida. Good morning. Tom,
Hello?
good morning. Yes, you're on the air. Please go ahead.
Yes, I have a question about this Homeland Security thing here in Florida. All of a sudden, they've doubled the prices on our licenses. We have to bring in 2 forms of like your electric bill and water bill, your original birth certificate, and I have had a license for 7 years since I had an infraction, or I had some problems in 2004. Now, 2005, they reinstated me, and in 2007, the 5-year was up. So Tallahassee, I did the mail-in thing, and all of a sudden, this Homeland Security people, when my birthday expired, now this is 8 years later, have a problem with 2004, and they will not give me a license now, and I'm one of the people that one of the millions that got laid off, 18 of us the same day, and it's going to cost me a bunch of money to straighten this mess out that Homeland Security, which I am paying for, to expand bigger and bigger, and all of a sudden here I am sitting here in this position, and Homeland Security that I pay is just throwing a bunch of horrible obstacles in my life.
Tom, thanks for the call. How do you
know
respond?
what? It's called the REAL ID Act. It's a bill that Congress passed all the way back in 2005 that would essentially create a one-size-fits-all standard for state driver's licenses, and it was supposed to be a security requirement. In fact, actually, many states rejected it. At this point, there's about 16 states that actually said, we're not going to comply with these REAL ID requirements. We think that they're burdensome and unnecessary. Florida obviously isn't one of those states, but you know, I urge the caller to call his local elected official, his state official, and say, hey, you guys should reject the REAL ID Act. Lots of other states have done it. Pennsylvania was the most recent just this week, as a matter of fact. So these kind of burdensome requirements we think are unnecessary. It's a separate discussion, but it's something where states have actually pushed back.
Chris Calabrese, clarify one point. Is it easy or difficult for law enforcement officials to get that warrant if they need it in a timely basis?
In a timely basis and on an emergency basis, it's easy. Assuming certainly if someone's life is at risk, it's easy. Assuming you have an appropriate standard for a criminal investigation, even if it's emergency, so you don't have the time, it's also easy. You simply have to go back later and get a warrant. So it's not difficult to do in an emergency. And again, it's the appropriate standard. There's a bipartisan agreement about this. The Supreme Court has affirmed that location tracking implicates the Fourth Amendment, which is a constitutional privacy protection. So sometimes easy and hard isn't always the question. Sometimes it's right and wrong. And here we think it's a constitutional question of right and wrong.
Privacy rights framing this comment from one of our viewers who is at the airport often saying, we're already guilty until proven innocent at airports, a total flip-flop of rights, and TSA is growing, coming to bus, trains, and roadblocks around the country. I'm not sure about roadblocks, but we've certainly seen it at the airports.
We have also seen it at buses and trains. I mean, you know, TSA, it's really troubling. I sit sometimes, and this is another issue that I do sometimes, so I'll sit with TSA officials at panels, and they'll start off by saying, listen, we can't have 100% security. Okay. So if we can't have 100% security, it's all going to be a balance. It's all going to be a trade-off. So the question is, how much are we losing? How much are we trading in terms of the groping and the naked body scanners, having TSA officials at buses, versus the security we're gaining? And I urge everybody to ask themselves that question and think about whether there's a good answer to that next time they're standing in one of those lines.
And that's another topic for another day, but we'll go back to the issue of cell phone and tracking devices and the Constitution and privacy issues. Our topic this morning with Chris Calabrese, who's an attorney with the ACLU. Sharon is on the phone, Hyattsville, Maryland. Good morning.
Good morning. I believe that Obama is using this to his advantage to track down political enemies and people like myself who simply speaks out about him. Well, that could be considered a crime, or suspicion of someone. It's just overstepping it, in my opinion. Why should we, track people on their cell phones? It don't have anything to do with keeping us safe. I believe that he's using this to use against his opposition, people like myself who speaks out against him. Who's to say? Just like the way they did Ted Nugent. He said nothing about harming the president or anything, but before you knew it, he had the FBI, he had the FBI after him. This is just so people could go after his political enemy. He just wants people to be silenced. He cannot stand criticism. He's thin-skinned.
Thank you, Sharon.
Well, that's the problem with not having an appropriate across-the-board standard, is you just don't know how it's being used.
So from Stan, what's the difference between passive GPS tracking and someone following you in a car and writing down your locations all day?
Well, it's an awful lot more work to follow you around. So, seriously, in some ways it's not more complicated than that. This would allow GPS tracking, cell phone tracking, would allow the government to simultaneously track thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people. Literally, it's technologically possible. It's actually happening. We're all carrying these devices all the time. So, the manpower alone, I think, would foreclose that kind of surveillance just by an individual or by, the government itself.
You can also share your comments on our Facebook page, facebook.com/cspan. Donna is on the phone from Wheeling, West Virginia. Good morning.
I'm on the phone now.
Yes, we can hear you, Donna. Go ahead.
My name is Donna Saunders. I'm a victim of the cell phone tracking.
How so?
Also,
Donna, how so?
Well, everything on a cell phone is repeated. You can hear yourself echoing. My family's other cell phone members have their cell phones. You can hear the echoing and everything.
Well, we all deal with echoing in the cell phone, but how does that? How do you know that means you're being tracked?
It's echoing on. I'm echoing on cell phone and land phones. And I went to use a pay phone on the city streets, and on the handle of the phone it says this phone is being tracked by the government. And I was with a fellow tenant where I used to live. In fact, they evicted me because I'm fighting for justice, and I've lived there 49 years in the Housing Authority, Wheeling Housing Authority. I am a victim of that. And they have evicted me. And I've been, 30 years on community services. I received an award in 2008 on I'm community builder and racial justice. And my family has been evicted. I'm homeless right now. And it's in DPSs on vehicles. They follow us everywhere we go. And this Wheeling is corrupt. And the police track me everywhere I go. The sheriff, I've been cut off by the sheriff department, one in front and one in back. And because I'm fighting for justice, for racial justice, I have extremist group living while I was living there, spinning their tires in front of my house, going over to that housing authority.
Donna, I'll stop you there on that point. Christopher Calabrese, did you want to respond?
Well, of course, I can't know about Donna's particular circumstances, but the fact is that all of our cell phones are, in essence, portable tracking devices. That's a byproduct of how they work. So whether or not someone is actually tracking any particular individual, the capacity is there, and just as a function of the cell phone, that kind of tracking is happening.
Matthew, good morning. Joining us from Utah, our line for Republicans with Chris Calabrese of the ACLU. Go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my question. What I'm curious is, where does the ACLU see as being the definitive level where checks and balances need to take place to ensure that this is not being abused by law enforcement or federal agencies and things of that nature? And what does the average citizen have as a way to respond if they feel that their rights have been infringed upon?
Thank you.
Well, it's a very good question. I think we think the line is probable cause. We think the line is that the same constitutional standard that we've been talking about today. in terms of the average citizen, you know, it's a very good question because, of course, this kind of surveillance is basically invisible. You know, you're not going to necessarily know if someone's tracking your cell phone. So what we believe is that there should be reporting and transparency so you have a sense about how much this is being used and, you know, what's being done with it. And then if it does happen and, you know, your case comes, you know, the law enforcement tries to use this in a case against you, if it's been obtained illegally, it should be thrown out. That's called suppression of evidence, and illegal evidence being suppressed. And if it doesn't lead to an investigation, but you still find out this surveillance is taking place and you believe it's improper, you should be able to go to the administrators of that particular police office and have a mandatory review of whether that officer or official acted appropriately and whether they should be disciplined. That's, again, similar to the Wiretap Act, the way that works right now.
Our next caller is from Cincinnati. B is on the phone, our line for Independence. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. Thank you. I am just listening to the discussion of cell phones, and I think the point has been touched upon, that I was just really surprised when I got a new cell phone that it pinpoints your location, and I just found that to be very disturbing. I guess I know that the cell phones can be, you know, people know from the tower, I suppose, where you would be at any given time, but it is really just upsetting to me to think that someone can pinpoint your exact location at any time. It just takes away from privacy all over the board, and that's very disturbing to me. And it seems that this trend started when President Bush was in office, that I remember trying to attend town hall meetings and being rejected because of, you know, perhaps wearing a T-shirt that they didn't like, or, you know, being anti whatever the policies were at that time. And so this is very disturbing to me to think that we can be tracked like this. And I don't know what this has to do with televisions as well. I'm a little skeptical even having my television on, thinking that perhaps someone can see through it.
Okay.
So,
we got a response. Thank you, B, from Ohio.
Well, just, I mean, you know, it sort of did start with President Bush, but that has more to do with the sort of rise of this particular technology and the use of cell phones. You know, and it's interesting to note that this pinpointing of location, it's not just your cell phone company. It's also, for example, the operating system your phone has. So if it has Safari or Google, that information is often shared with them. Location information is also can be shared from your phone with the apps you have on it. If you have a smartphone and it collects your information, that's being logged as well. So, you know, it's not just the carriers. There's really a lot of third parties who have your location. And that's another reason to think that this has gotten a little out of control and we need to regulate it.
Well, let me come back to that last point, which is from Ron Gums, who's saying, where is the congressional oversight of tracking of cell phones? And as you indicated, Congress is taking up the issue this week.
Yes, Congress is taking up the issue this week in a number of ways. We saw Senator Franken wrote a great letter to the Department of Justice asking them how they use these practices. Representative Ed Markey wrote a great letter the week before to the carriers, asking them, what are your practices when law enforcement comes to you? There'll be a hearing this Thursday in front of the House Judiciary Committee, the Crime Subcommittee, about the GPS Act, which is a bill that would require a probable cause warrant in order to use GPS. And actually, if you want to learn more about that, you can go to the ACLU's website at www.aclu.org. Just search the GPS Act, and you can find an action. You can find more information about it. And if you want to learn about that law and about that hearing, you can find more there.
Christopher Calabrese of the ACLU, thanks very much for being with us. Coming up in just a moment, a conversation with Constitution Party nominee Virgil Goode, a former member of Congress. And later, we're going to introduce you to Ralph Eubanks of the Library of Congress. This is one of a number of campaign posters. Nixon's the one back in 1972 as he campaigned for re-election. And we'll look back at political posters and their influence on American politics as the Washington Journal continues on this Sunday morning. We're back in a moment.
Over the past year, C-SPAN's local content vehicle Cities Tour has taken